A room with no windows. Cold fluorescent lights, harsh, unforgiving. The air feels heavy, as if the space itself is silently watching. At the center of the room, a man sits before an empty table. No papers, no screens, nothing that could offer even the smallest clue. Only a sealed brown envelope. On the other side of a mirrored glass, several figures observe. Military officers, scientists, intelligence analysts. No one speaks, no one moves. The man takes a deep breath, closes his eyes, and begins to speak. He describes a place thousands of miles away, an isolated military base, underground structures, antennas, armored vehicles, a symbol painted on an interior wall that no one outside that facility should know. He has never been there, never seen images of it, received no information, and yet he is describing everything in unsettling detail. This is not science fiction. This is not a movie. It is a real experiment funded by the United States government. For more than 20 years, one of the most powerful nations on Earth invested millions of dollars trying to answer a question that feels pulled straight from a horror novel. Can the human mind perceive what is distant, invisible, or not yet happened? This secret program was given an almost poetic name: Project Stargate, a gateway to the stars. But what they were truly trying to open was not a portal in space. It was a portal within human consciousness. To understand why this experiment existed, we need to go back to a time when the world lived under constant, silent tension: the Cold War. After World War II, the planet was divided into two opposing blocks. On one side, the United States and its allies. On the other, the Soviet Union. It was a war without direct battles, but filled with indirect confrontations, espionage, sabotage, and displays of power. Both sides possessed weapons capable of destroying civilization many times over. Total annihilation was not just possible, it was considered inevitable. In this atmosphere of paranoia, any strategic advantage, no matter how small, could determine the fate of the world. Spy satellites crossed the skies. Nuclear submarines patrolled the oceans in absolute silence. Embedded agents lived double lives inside enemy capitals. But there was an even more disturbing fear. The fear that the enemy was exploring something beyond conventional technology. Intelligence reports began circulating within the US government, suggesting that the Soviets were heavily investing in psychic research. Telepathy, mind control, remote influence, remote viewing. If any of this were real, even partially, it would represent an advantage impossible to detect, block, or predict. You cannot intercept thoughts. You cannot shoot down an invisible attack. You cannot defend against something that moves through walls, distance, and secrecy. To many officials, the idea sounded absurd. To others, it was far too dangerous to ignore. And so, in the early 1970s, the United States made a decision to investigate the unthinkable, to see if the paranormal could be turned into a weapon. The project began quietly, funded by intelligence agencies and conducted in collaboration with civilian scientists. The primary goal was to study a specific ability known as remote viewing, the capacity to perceive information about a distant place, object, or event without any physical or sensory contact. In simple terms, seeing with the mind. Researchers recruited individuals who claimed to possess psychic abilities, but also ordinary people who showed unusual results in preliminary testing. They were placed in controlled environments, stripped of any sensory cues. A secret target was selected by another team. It could be a military base, a building, an object hidden inside a box, anything. The participant would then attempt to see the target mentally and describe it. At first, the results were inconsistent, vague descriptions, frequent errors, ambiguity, but occasionally, something strange happened. Some participants provided details far too specific to dismiss as coincidence. Accurate architectural layouts, precise geographical features, hidden objects. These rare but striking successes were enough to keep the funding alive. Because if this ability could be trained, the implications would be enormous. One of the earliest and most famous participants was Ingo Swann, an artist and researcher fascinated by psychic phenomena. During one experiment, he was asked to describe an unknown target. He began speaking about a distant celestial body, thin rings, orbital dust, an unusual atmosphere. The target was the planet Jupiter. Years later, space missions would confirm details that at the time of the experiment were not publicly known. For some scientists, this proved nothing. For others, it was deeply unsettling. Another central figure in the program was Joseph McMonigal, a former army officer who would become one of the most prolific remote viewers. He took part in hundreds of sessions. In one of them, he was instructed to describe a target connected to the Soviet Union. McMonigal reported specific port structures, submarines under construction, and technical features that had not been disclosed. Later, satellite imagery would confirm the existence of a facility with strikingly similar characteristics. Coincidence? Logical inference? Or something beyond that? Intelligence analysts were not interested in philosophical explanations. They wanted usable results. During the 1980s, Project Stargate moved beyond laboratory experiments and into real operations. Remote viewers were tasked with locating missing hostages, identifying secret installations, and gathering strategic intelligence. In one well-known case, they attempted to locate a kidnapped general in the Middle East. The participant described a mountainous region, stone buildings, and irregular military presence. Weeks later, the general was found in a location that closely matched the description. But there was a fundamental problem. There was no consistency. Some sessions produced useful information, others were completely wrong. There was no way to guarantee results on demand. And in intelligence work, unpredictability can be just as dangerous as ignorance. Still, the program continued, because if it worked, even occasionally, it could shift the global balance of power. Internal reports reveal a troubling mix of skepticism and fascination. Some scientists believed the results were statistically significant. Others argued that cognitive bias, selective interpretation, and coincidence explained everything. Even the government itself seemed divided. But there was one question no one could ignore. Why were the Soviets also investing heavily in this kind of research? Was it collective paranoia, or were both sides chasing something real? As the years passed, attempts were made to expand the use of remote viewing. Some experiments explored the possibility of predicting future events. Others investigated mental influence over physical objects. None of these paths produced conclusive evidence, but they were never entirely dismissed. In 1995, after the end of the Cold War, the United States officially shut down Project Stargate. An independent review was conducted to evaluate its effectiveness. The public conclusion was ambiguous. There was not enough proof of consistent operational value, but there was also no clear evidence of deliberate fraud. In other words, the program was not considered a success, nor a complete failure, simply inconclusive. Declassified documents revealed that the project had cost around $20 million over more than 2 decades. a modest sum by military standards, but enormous for something considered unproven. The inevitable question remains, why sustain a program for so long if it supposedly did not work? Perhaps because, occasionally, it did, or at least, it seemed to. And when it comes to national security, even the smallest possibility can justify massive investment. Today, decades later, Project Stargate occupies a strange space between science, history, and mystery. There is no consensus on what truly happened. Some former participants claim remote viewing is real and can be trained. Others say the results were exaggerated or misinterpreted. Skeptical scientists point to methodological flaws and lack of consistent replication. But the official records remain: reports, transcripts, evaluations, and above all, the undeniable fact that a superpower took the subject seriously enough to turn it into a military program. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect is not the possibility that the human mind holds unknown capabilities, but that governments would be willing to exploit them. Because if someone could see anywhere, at any time, no secret would remain safe, no strategy would stay hidden. No decision could be made without the risk of being anticipated. Privacy would cease to exist, war would change forever, and power would concentrate in the hands of those who mastered this ability. But there is an even more unsettling possibility. What if Project Stargate was never truly shut down? What if it simply changed names, structure, funding? Secret programs rarely disappear completely. They evolve, they adapt, they become harder to detect. Perhaps the declassified documents reveal only part of the story, a controlled version, a narrative safe enough to release, because the real question is not whether remote viewing is real. It is whether someone has already figured out how to make it reliable. If that has happened, it would never be publicly announced. Silence can be the ultimate form of protection or control. Imagine a world where political decisions, military movements, or even economic negotiations could be observed from a distance without any visible technology. No satellites, no wiretaps, no trace. It would be the ultimate form of espionage, invisible, undetectable, irreversible. Perhaps Project Stargate was just a failed attempt, or perhaps it was the first step towards something much greater, something that still exists in the shadows, something that will never be officially confirmed. Because some capabilities, if real, are too dangerous to reveal, and some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. In the end, the true mystery is not whether those men sitting in windowless rooms could really see across space and time. The real mystery is why so many resources, so many experts, and so many years were dedicated to it. Governments do not invest decades in fantasies, they invest in possibilities, even unlikely ones, especially unlikely ones. Because in a world where power determines the fate of billions, even the smallest edge can justify the unthinkable. Perhaps we will never know the full truth. Perhaps the remaining files will stay classified forever. Or perhaps the answer is hidden in plain sight, buried between real facts, exaggerations, and disbelief. But one thing is certain: Project Stargate existed. And for a time, one of the most powerful nations in history seriously believed the human mind could transcend the limits of known reality. Whether that is proof of scientific ambition, strategic paranoia, or genuine discovery, depends on who tells the story and how much we are willing to believe. If you want to keep exploring humanity's most forgotten, disturbing, and fascinating secrets, subscribe to The Hidden, because some stories are not just about the past. They are about what may still be happening, right now.